My unsteady first steps in America. I still vividly remember those first uncertain days after I moved to Boston, Massachusetts. My name is Emily Tran, and though I was born in Vietnam, I'd always dreamed of the wide, open promise of America. I left behind everything that was familiar, the humid mornings, the crowded markets, and the chattering of my family at breakfast, for a country where opportunity was said to grow on every tree. The reality, as I quickly learned, was far more complicated than the shiny visions I'd nurtured as a hopeful teenager. Life in Boston was both exhilarating and disorienting. The city moved so fast, and its people even faster. I remember standing at busy intersections, the traffic lights blinking impatiently, while commuters rushed past, phones pressed to their ears, never glancing my way. Everyone seemed to know exactly where they belonged. Everyone, except for me. The language I'd spent so long studying in Vietnam suddenly tripped me up. American English was full of unexpected idioms and rapid-fire delivery. Even at the grocery store, I felt out of place. Fruit looked different. Brands were unrecognizable. And the cashier's small talk sometimes made me flustered and silent. But nothing challenged me more than trying to fit in with my new family. I'd met Michael, my husband, at graduate school. He was a proud Bostonian with a ready smile and a heart for adventure. Our cultures fascinated each other and, if I'm honest, sometimes clashed in the most predictable ways. When we married, I moved in with Michael and his family. His gentle but reserved father, his chatty younger sister, and above all, his mother, Catherine. Catherine was every bit the archetype of a traditional New England mother. She took pride in family history, home-cooked meals, and community rituals. She always hosted Thanksgiving and commanded the kitchen with an unspoken authority I found both impressive and intimidating. From the moment I stepped into her house, I sensed that I would need to work hard to find my place. Catherine greeted me politely, but with a formality that left no room for genuine warmth. My efforts to connect felt awkward, sometimes even unwelcome. I tried to help in the kitchen, only to be handed small, insignificant tasks. At dinner, I watched Michael's family reminisce about childhood memories and inside jokes I didn't understand. Several times I caught Catherine appraising me with a look that seemed to say, "Are you really the one for my son?" My accent, my cooking, even the way I dressed, everything seemed to set me apart. At night, I'd lie awake next to Michael, quietly replaying the day's awkward moments in my head. Sometimes I wondered if I'd made a terrible mistake, if the boldness that brought me across the world had, in fact, set me up for loneliness and disappointment. But somehow, beneath the uncertainty and the stumbles, a small ember of determination burned inside me. I promised myself that no matter how out of place I felt, I would not be defeated by the challenges of my new world. I would earn my place here, even if it took every ounce of courage and resilience I had. The early days of tears, as a daughter-in-law. If I thought adapting to American life was overwhelming, nothing quite prepared me for my first months as a newlywed daughter-in-law in the Campbell household. Everything was foreign. Not just the customs, the food, or the language, but the delicate, invisible web of expectations that seemed to govern every interaction at home. Being the only Asian face in their all-American family photo, I felt like an intruder at first. There were moments I caught my reflection in the kitchen window and hardly recognized the woman looking back at me, nervous, hesitant, and constantly second-guessing herself. My mother-in-law, Linda, was like a silent storm, never outright unkind, but always measured in her warmth, and sometimes, frankly, cold in her affection. She was a woman of routines. Pot roast every Sunday, perfectly polished silverware, everything in its right place. I desperately wanted to please her, to engage in conversation, or just have her ask after my family back in California. Instead, her comments, though always couched politely, often left me feeling like I was barely meeting the invisible bar she'd set. I'd try to help with dinner, only to be met with vague directions, or have my efforts tactfully rerouted to the simpler tasks, setting the table or peeling potatoes. She'd reminisce about her own children's childhoods, laughing along with her daughter, Donna, referencing stories and jokes that sailed clear over my head. When Linda did address me directly at the dinner table, her questions were always safe, impersonal. How was your day? Or, did you remember to pick up milk? Never. How are you settling in? Or, do you miss your family? Small talk became a small prison I struggled to break free from. The weight of comparison pressed in as well. Family friends would visit, and, in hushed voices, Linda would mention how Donna's husband fit right in from day one, or how neighbor girls were naturally so helpful. I often found myself shrinking into the wallpaper, wishing I could turn invisible. My accent, my different taste in food, even my clothing choices, felt endlessly scrutinized. Some evenings, I would retreat to my room and find the tears coming before I even had the chance to take off my shoes. I missed my own mother, who would have told me not to take it to heart, to be patient, and that love wins in the end. I wondered if I was failing, not only as a wife, but as a daughter-in-law, and if this was all my bold dreams had bought me, a constant ache of wanting to belong. Still, I held on to small moments of hope. When my husband, Daniel, would quietly squeeze my hand under the table, or when Donna offered to help me understand a TV reference I didn't get, those fleeting kindnesses reminded me that my story here was still unfolding. Even if these early chapters were soaked in tears, I kept hidden from view the wounds and the will to rise above. There's a particular kind of ache that comes from being constantly reminded that you don't quite belong, as though every interaction were a silent test you were destined to fail. I remember those first months in the Campbell home, not as a seamless transition, but as a strange twilight zone, where I was simultaneously seen too much and not seen at all. The wounds weren't always visible, but they ran deep, felt in the awkward pauses, the glances exchanged when I walked into the room, the way my enthusiasm was sometimes met with polite indifference. Most mornings, I'd sit quietly at the breakfast table with my in-laws. Linda would pour herself coffee, pass the cream to her husband, Walter, and chat with Donna about the week ahead. I'd smile, hoping someone would include me, but my presence seemed like a footnote rather than a subject in their conversations. Often, I'd try to start a story from my childhood about Tet celebrations or school days in Saigon, only to abandon it midway, lost in translation and weighed down by awkward silence. I missed understanding every joke, catching every reference, being present and visible. I didn't always realize how much effort it took to navigate daily life until I found myself utterly exhausted at night. Not physically, but emotionally, from constantly measuring my words, watching my gestures, and suppressing small pieces of myself for fear of standing out more than I already did. Even my taste in music or way of making tea became moments of inner debate. Should I ask for the green tea I love, or should I quietly drink the coffee everyone else had? At times, Linda's comments felt like little tests of my identity. You know, Daniel always loved his mother's lasagna best, she'd say, just as I was about to suggest a dish from home. Or, our family's always been very close, Donna moved back to Boston after college. I'd wonder if these were indirect reminders that my place in this house was temporary until proven otherwise. No one overtly told me I didn't belong, yet so much was implied in the details. The gentle yet clear boundaries, the careful politeness, the persistent sense that I needed to demonstrate my worth again and again. I won't pretend I didn't long for validation in those days. I craved a moment, just one, when Linda might look at me and smile, purely and warmly, with the acceptance reserved for family, not a stranger. The hurt didn't manifest in dramatic confrontations, but in 100 small moments. The invitation I never received to help with holiday baking, the stories I wasn't included in, the subtle, stiff formality in her voice, even after months of living under the same roof. But I also grew tired of being quietly diminished. There came a Sunday afternoon, after yet another subtly dismissive exchange, when something inside me shifted. I sat alone at my favorite park bench, a stray leaf tumbling down beside me, and finally let myself feel angry at the isolation, the constant feeling of being other, and at myself for apologizing for who I was. As I sat there, I realized I was shrinking not just to fit into their house, but to avoid conflict, to not make anyone uncomfortable, and in doing so, I was losing the very parts of myself that made me strong and whole. It dawned on me that Linda would never see me differently if I only ever tried to blend in, to be invisible, or to win her affection by outshining her unspoken expectations. I asked myself, what did I have to lose by standing up, kindly but firmly, for my own identity? What if, instead of waiting for someone to finally tell me I belonged, I started by believing it myself? That night, I decided to share with Daniel what I'd been feeling. Not the sanitized version, but the raw truth. I was anxious, quietly hurt, and determined to stop hiding. He listened, truly listened, and for the first time, I felt less alone. He told me gently, you can't disappear to be loved. You're here for a reason. From that point, I set small goals for myself. I'd contribute a Vietnamese dish for Sunday dinners. Whether or not anyone ate it, I'd invite Linda to chat about my family back home. Even if the conversations felt stilted, I'd continue working on my career, chasing opportunities I was passionate about, not just to prove a point, but to remind myself of my own worth. I also began to nurture friendships outside the home, at work, in the local community center, even at the gym. These connections reminded me that I was more than the sum of my struggles. And slowly, my confidence grew. I learned to embrace my accent as a reminder of where I'd come from, not a flaw to be hidden. I poured my energy into personal growth, improving my skills, staying informed, and deepening my understanding of American culture, while holding on to what made my heritage beautiful. With each small victory, a compliment at work, a genuine laugh shared with Donna, the first time Linda asked for my recipe, I felt my spirit restoring itself. I realized that strength isn't measured by never being hurt, but by how you rise after each wound. Sometimes that means forgiving others for their ignorance or fear, and other times it means forgiving yourself for feeling lost or wounded. It was a long, slow journey, but I refused to let the pain of exclusion define me. Instead, I let those wounds strengthen my resolve to create a place for myself, not just in my marriage or in Daniel's family, but in every facet of my new life. By daring to be vulnerable, I found the backbone to push forward. And though acceptance from Linda didn't come overnight, I had found my own acceptance, and with it, a new resilience I hadn't known I possessed. Looking back now, I see how crucial this chapter was. the ache, the longing, the will to persevere. They weren't weaknesses, but the furnace in which my courage was forged. Every hard-earned inch of belonging was a mark not just of endurance, but of victory. I realized I could be kind, true to my own roots, and unafraid to take up space, no matter whose kitchen I was standing in, or which family holiday I was joining, turning my life around through my career. If there was a definitive turning point in my American journey, it was when I decided to stop measuring my self-worth solely through the eyes of my new family. I remember sitting alone in the city library one rainy Saturday afternoon, surrounded by strangers, yet oddly comforted by the anonymity. It was then that I realized, if I couldn't control how my mother-in-law or anyone else saw me, I could at least control my own growth and happiness. That revelation lit a fire beneath me, a stubborn, smoldering belief that maybe, just maybe, I could pave my own path here in America, independent of whether I fit seamlessly into the Campbell household. In Vietnam, I'd studied marketing and had always loved the thrill of strategic thinking. Yet here in the U.S., my skills had felt invisible, occasionally acknowledged with polite curiosity at family dinners, but never fully seen for their potential. I decided to channel my energy into my passion, applying for internships and entry-level jobs all over Boston. I wrote and rewrote my resume, bracing myself for rejection, but resolved not to let the anxiety paralyze me this time around. Landing my first position at a local marketing agency felt surreal. My team was diverse, young, ambitious, and bustling with ideas. For the first time since arriving in America, I felt like I belonged somewhere beyond the boundaries of our cramped apartment and the scrutinizing kitchen table. The agency was tough and the pace relentless, but I thrived in the pressure. I spent long nights learning about American consumer behavior, memorizing idioms, and polishing up my presentation skills to sound more confident, more native. Every successful pitch, every campaign that landed a new client, was a tiny, hard-won victory, a small piece of the missing confidence puzzle. It wasn't always easy. Some days, I'd get home exhausted, my nerves jangling from back-to-back meetings, or awkward jokes I didn't quite understand. There were nights when Linda, my mother-in-law, would remark without malice about my late hours, as if doubting whether my dedication to my career was worth the time away from home. "You work so much, honey. Make sure you're not neglecting family," she'd say, not unkindly, but with a certain undertone that stung. The old waves of guilt would threaten to rise, but I reminded myself that forging my independence didn't mean abandoning those I loved. It just meant making space for all of me. I poured myself into my work, sometimes to the point of obsession. My curiosity became my armor. I volunteered for the hardest projects, stayed late, showed up early, and steadily began to build a reputation for reliability and innovation. When I landed a major campaign with a regional supermarket chain, my boss singled me out for recognition in front of the whole team. I was embarrassed and proud. For once, my accent and background weren't obstacles. My differentness became an asset, helping the agency understand and reach a rapidly growing market of Asian American consumers. With each achievement, my world opened up. I began earning enough to contribute significantly to our household expenses. Daniel, my husband, beamed whenever I told him about my day. He loved seeing me shine, and his encouragement was a buoy whenever the old doubts returned. Slowly, even Linda seemed to soften, occasionally asking about my projects in a tone bordering on curiosity rather than obligation. My new sense of self began to leak into other parts of my life. I joined professional groups, networked with women from all over the world, and even mentored a few new immigrants at the office who reminded me of myself just a couple years earlier. Still, there were setbacks. My accent was sometimes mocked by clients who didn't think I noticed. A coworker once called me exotic during a presentation, making me flush with shame and anger. I swore to myself not to become embittered, but also not to let anything slide that was unjust. It was difficult to navigate the murky waters of microaggressions without feeling either invisible or too visible. Yet, every time I stumbled, I picked myself up, determined to succeed, not just for me, but for the version of myself who'd arrived, with trembling hands and wide eyes, a lifetime ago. 3 years after landing in America, I was promoted to account manager, a title that, for me, meant far more than a new office or an increased paycheck. It meant I had built something real, something substantial, from the scaffolding of my own struggle and resilience. My parents, still in Vietnam, cried happy tears on the crackly video call when I shared the news. Daniel took me out to dinner, toasting, the strongest woman I know. Even Linda brought out a bottle of wine. Her congratulations reserved, but undeniably genuine. This professional turning point changed the dynamics at home. Financial independence gave me the power to make choices, to dream bigger, and to support Daniel in his own pursuits. It also forced the family to see me in a new light. I was no longer just Daniel's wife or the daughter-in-law with a funny accent. I had become an equal contributor, worthy of respect, not just for enduring, but for thriving. Sometimes I'd catch Linda watching me quietly, a thoughtful look softening her features. She'd ask about my workday, and once, when the family gathered for Thanksgiving, she introduced me to her friends as Emily, our marketing manager. She's doing amazing things in her field. The pride in her voice was subtle, but it was there, and I held on to it as proof that even the deepest skepticism could be shifted with persistence and results. Looking back, investing in my career was never about outshining anyone or proving a point. It was about reclaiming my own narrative in a place where I'd once felt small and disposable. The office became my sanctuary, my proving ground, and eventually, the source of my self-assurance. The stirrings of pride rippled outward, impacting my marriage, my friendships, and, perhaps most significantly, my place in Daniel's family. I realized that I didn't need to apologize for being ambitious or for wanting something more than quiet acceptance. My career was a testament to the truth that you can shape your own destiny, even in a new land, even when the odds are stacked against you. Sometimes, all it takes is the courage to bet on yourself and the willingness to start again, over and over, until something finally sticks. And in those moments, when the old insecurities crept back, I'd recall the younger version of me, sitting in the Boston airport, suitcase in hand, with everything to lose and everything to gain. I'd whisper to her that it gets better, that the world opens to those stubborn enough not to quit, and that, eventually, even the hardest-won victories become the foundation of a brand new life. A family crisis, weathering the storm, together. The real test of belonging rarely arrives with fanfare. More often, it comes creeping in the quiet hours, disguised as a crisis no one ever saw coming. I remember the tension simmering in our household one late autumn evening, when the first hints of trouble began to surface. Tom, my brother-in-law, was usually an irrepressible optimist, the kind who refused to let anxiety show on his face. But that night, he looked like he'd aged a decade in the span of a single phone call. The company his family had poured their lifeblood into for decades, a modest but proud local business, was teetering on the brink of collapse. I could feel the fear swirl in the air, thick and suffocating, as if we were all clinging to a lifeboat in a stormy sea. Suddenly, our home, which usually buzzed with the harmless chaos of family life, became a hotbed of panic. Phone lines lit up with calls to lawyers, accountants, desperate pleas to long-lost business contacts. My mother-in-law, the matriarch whose authority was as much a force of nature as the New England weather, dissolved into tears at the kitchen table. Michael, my husband, paced the hallway in tight, agitated circles whenever he returned home from work. Even the usually stoic patriarch, my father-in-law, seemed overwhelmed, staring vacantly at papers and spreadsheets, the lines on his forehead deepening with each passing day. Every room felt heavy, haunted by the silent questions nobody dared to ask out loud. What if everything we've built disappears? Would we have to sell the house? What does life look like if security evaporates overnight? At first, I felt completely helpless, an outsider again, looking in on a family crisis that wasn't truly my own. My instinct was to withdraw, to stay out of the way, but every time I caught Michael's anxious glance or saw my mother-in-law wiping her red eyes, I felt a gnawing ache in my chest. Old insecurities crept in, whispering that it wasn't my place to interfere, that anything I said or did could be misinterpreted. Yet underneath my anxiety was a fierce loyalty, almost protective, for the people who, through conflict and slow acceptance, had become my family. I spent long nights researching the company's problems while Michael slept. My marketing background kicked in with a vengeance. I started analyzing their business model, scanning through industry reports and case studies, and cold messaging contacts from graduate school who specialized in crisis management. There were moments, staring at my computer screen with a cup of cold tea and a mind full of frantic ideas, when exhaustion washed over me, but I refused to let it win. Every time doubt crept in, I reminded myself, I am not powerless. I can help. If America had taught me anything, it was that you could shape your fate, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. One evening, I quietly approached Tom and Michael as they argued over spreadsheets in the dining room. Hands trembling, I offered to go through the company's client list and see where opportunities had been left untapped. To my surprise, Tom didn't bristle or brush me off. He just looked at me, worn and desperate, and nodded. It became a ritual. After work and dinner, we'd gather around the table, drowning in paperwork, challenging each other's assumptions, and pushing the limits of what felt possible. As I sifted through their marketing strategies, patterns began to emerge. The business, once nimble and innovative, had grown stagnant, still operating on word of mouth in a world that had long since moved online. They had loyal customers, but little community outreach. There were dozens of dormant leads, old collaborators who might be persuaded to return, and new opportunities in the local immigrant marketplace that nobody had ever noticed. I drafted proposals for digital campaigns and suggested ways to rebrand products, reaching out directly to community organizations who'd never previously been approached by the company. The weeks that followed were some of the most intense of my life. I juggled my day job, late-night brainstorming with Tom and Michael, and tense, sometimes emotional family meetings. At times, I felt dangerously close to collapsing under the weight of their expectations, and my own. There were setbacks, too. A business loan that fell through at the last minute, a potential partnership that fizzled out, arguments erupting in the kitchen over the smallest decisions. My mother-in-law vacillated between hope and despair, hugging me fiercely one minute and snapping from stress the next. My own resolve was tested in ways I'd never anticipated. But each little breakthrough served as fuel. When we landed our first major new client from the Vietnamese American community, thanks to my outreach, I cried with relief. Tom clapped me on the back, grinning for the first time in months. Even Linda, my mother-in-law, so often reserved and critical, looked at me with something like astonished gratitude. I felt, for the first time, not like a guest, nor an outsider trying to justify her presence, but a real partner in the family's fight for survival. Evenings during this period became a surreal blend of exhaustion and camaraderie. Our tiny kitchen transformed into a war room, cluttered with laptops, legal pads, and half-drunk mugs of coffee. Sometimes Michael or Donna would crack an awkward joke just to break the tension, and we'd all laugh too loudly, our relief palpable. There were nights when frustration boiled over, especially between Tom and his father, but we always regrouped, united by a shared fear and a stubborn will not to crumble. As the company's outlook slowly improved, so did the mood in the Campbell household. Deals were signed, debts renegotiated, and, with careful stewardship, cash began to flow once again. We didn't return to normal overnight. It was a slow, deliberate crawl out of uncertainty. But the stress that had suffocated us day and night began to recede. Linda started humming when she cooked again. Tom grew less terse, and even my father-in-law shared a rare smile at the breakfast table. Deep down, I knew a fundamental shift had occurred. After so many years of quietly fighting for my place, I'd finally crossed a threshold nobody could deny. My skills, my perspective, my very presence had made a difference that no one else could have. In helping to rescue the business, I wasn't simply repaying a debt or performing my duties as a daughter-in-law. I was contributing as a true member of the family, respected and needed. Looking back now, the crisis feels like both the hardest and most transformative chapter of my American journey. It forced everyone, myself included, to abandon assumptions about whose role was whose, about what family, loyalty, and strength actually looked like. I discovered wells of perseverance in myself I didn't know existed. My relationship with Linda began to thaw. We started working together in the kitchen, her comments gentler, her gestures more thoughtful. Michael and I grew closer, bonded by nights spent worrying side by side, but surviving together. Even Donna started confiding her own dreams and setbacks, erasing the invisible lines that used to separate us. There are still moments, even years later, when I marvel at how crisis became the crucible for our unity. I learned the true meaning of family in the fire of near loss, where the only way out was together. The memories from those months remain etched in my mind. The spreadsheets splattered with coffee, the tightening and releasing of hands in silent reassurance, the collective sigh of relief when we finally saw light at the end of the tunnel. I emerged from that storm, not just as a survivor, but as a builder of businesses, of bridges, and of belonging. It's only in the shadow of uncertainty, I think, that you discover what you and those you love are truly capable of. In saving the company, I found my own place, stronger and more unshakable than I dared imagine when I first set foot in this foreign land. A heartfelt moment of acceptance. As I look back on everything my husband's family and I have endured, it's this chapter, this long, fragile journey toward genuine acceptance, that stands out with the most surprising tenderness. I still remember that period as something almost shimmering, full of nervous hope and thin-skinned vulnerability, where every day I ached for something simple, to be seen, not as an outsider carving out a barely tolerated niche, but as someone cherished, essential, and real. For years, my efforts to assimilate felt unanswered. I played the role of helper, the supportive spouse, the occasional kitchen apprentice, an ensemble cast member in the Campbell family's drama. Yet there was always something in Linda's, my mother-in-law's, reserved smile, or the way she'd make sure the house looked perfect just before friends arrived. It made me feel as though I had yet to be truly welcomed home. Acceptance, I used to think, might come crashing in like some great celebration. Fireworks, cheers, public declarations. In reality, it came slantwise, quietly, on the heels of the storm our family had just weathered. The business crisis that threatened to tear everything apart left us raw, stripped of the old surfaces and routines. Out of that vulnerability grew a new kind of candor. The walls everyone had built, especially Linda and me, became thin, permeable, sometimes melting altogether. The first glimmer came one evening over dinner. The mood around the table had softened for weeks, partly out of shared relief as the business improved, but also because we'd been forced into close proximity and collaboration. As usual, I set the table and slipped automatically into my unobtrusive role. But this night, Linda surprised me. She laid her hand on mine as I was about to sit down. A small gesture, one I might have missed if I hadn't so yearned for it. "Emily," she began, her voice hesitant but sincere, "about everything. Thank you." She cleared her throat, searching for words. "Without your ideas and your stubbornness, we wouldn't have made it." It was the first time my efforts were acknowledged, not just as helpful, but as vital. The relief that washed through me was so intense, I nearly laughed and cried at the same time. Growing up, I'd always watched for moments like this in movies, or heard stories of they happened to others. I never thought it would be so simple and small, yet so transformative for me. Suddenly, the kitchen, which had always felt like her kingdom and my temporary workplace, became a place where both our contributions mattered. In the days and weeks that followed, Linda began to include me in things that, in the past, she had kept strictly her domain. She would gently call me in to chop vegetables or ask my opinion about the best way to season the roast. At first, I responded with cautious enthusiasm, afraid that any wrong move might close the window that had just inched open. But instead, she met me halfway. Her questions grew warmer, and sometimes she'd even ask about my mother's recipes or share memories of her own first years as a bride. It took time for me to believe that this wasn't charity or gratitude that would fade after the business stabilized. No, something fundamental had shifted. We had finally seen each other, truly seen, not just through the lens of comparison and difference, but as women who cared deeply about their families, and perhaps more than anything, wanted to be understood. One afternoon, Linda invited me out for coffee, not as a formality, but as a genuine gesture. We found ourselves in a cozy corner booth at a sleepy cafe near the river. The air was brisk outside, but inside, the light sifted down in golden rays, making the wood tables glow. She talked about how overwhelming it was running a business for so many years, and the fears she'd harbored about passing on control, about losing her family's legacy. She confessed how, in her own way, she'd felt like an outsider when she first married into the Campbell family. These revelations stunned me. I found myself sharing my own fears with her. The weight of expectations from my family back in Vietnam, the guilt for not calling home enough, the exhaustion of always measuring myself against some invisible yardstick. We laughed together, a little shyly, over our mutual insecurities. It was one of the first times our conversations wandered into the realm of friendship rather than strict family hierarchy. Little by little, the entire dynamic at home grew gentler. Michael, ever observant, squeezed my shoulder one night as we cleaned up after dinner, whispering, "She's changing, Em. You did that." It's hard to describe the mix of pride and gratitude that bloomed in me each time someone in the family turned to me for advice or simply shared their day without reservation or guardedness. Tom, who'd once barely acknowledged me outside company talk, began asking for help with tricky negotiations. Donna, my sister-in-law, confided her frustrations and dreams. I was no longer the daughter-in-law from Vietnam, but simply and finally family. Of course, the old insecurities didn't vanish overnight. Sometimes I still caught myself flinching, innocuous comments, or waiting for the proverbial shoe to drop. But these moments became less frequent as the acceptance around me grew less tentative and more ingrained in our routines. Linda's invitations became more open. "Come help with Thanksgiving desserts." Or, "Could you teach me that noodle soup you made?" We started developing new traditions, where my Vietnamese heritage blended naturally into the Campbell family's tapestry. Fish sauce next to cranberry sauce, spring rolls alongside stuffing. One memory encapsulates the transformation more than any other. That Thanksgiving, for the first time, Linda handed me her mother's cherished recipe box, a battered old tin filled with handwritten cards and decades of family kitchen wisdom. She suggested we do the holiday meal together. As equals, we spent the whole afternoon shoulder to shoulder, sometimes bickering like cooks who cared too much, but mostly laughing over mishaps and sharing stories when relatives arrived. Linda introduced me with genuine pride as her partner in the kitchen and in the family. I felt seen, the real me, not just as Daniel's wife, but as Emily, co-architect of our shared life. Many months later, as things settled into a new normal, I noticed other subtle changes. My father-in-law asked about Vietnamese New Year customs. Donna started helping plan a small traditional altar for my late grandfather. Michael's childhood photos now sat side by side with shots of my own family, bridging continents on our living room wall. Somehow, the house no longer felt like a museum I tiptoed through, but a home we were all actively building together. Even friends and neighbors seemed to pick up on the shift. At local events or community gatherings, Linda would seek me out, drawing me into warm circles of conversation. She made sure to highlight my achievements, sometimes with more enthusiasm than I dared show myself. Once, I overheard her recount to a friend how proud she was of my work in helping the family business, and how our cultural differences now felt like strengths, not obstacles. That same winter, a local magazine reached out to feature the family business's turnaround story. They wanted Linda and Tom to be in the photos, but Linda insisted the whole family be included, and specifically requested me by name. During the interview, she spoke candidly about the challenges we faced, but emphasized how much she'd learned from my perspective and resilience. After the article came out, I found a note tucked into my jacket pocket. Linda's handwriting, a little shaky, but unmistakably heartfelt. "Emily, you belong here. You always did. We just needed time to see it. Thank you for never giving up on any of us." That gesture, so quietly monumental, left me teary-eyed in the garage. I stood clutching that note in the winter dusk, reading it and rereading it, letting her words chip away at the last of the old doubts I'd carried. In that moment, all the struggles, the awkward years, the self-doubt and late-night tears melded into something bittersweet, but beautiful. I thought of my parents in Hanoi, of the strong women in my family line, and wished I could convey to them how complete I finally felt. Acceptance, I realized, is not just something handed down from those who already have power or membership. It's something built through sweat and misunderstandings and the courage to remain present, even when you feel invisible. It took so much longer than I'd hoped and came packaged in small moments, not grand gestures. But that's precisely why it means so much to me now. It's real, hard-earned, a mosaic of little victories, each one lined with its own memory. As time went on, my relationship with Linda deepened into a rare friendship. We became sounding boards for each other, swapping tales over coffee or while folding laundry together. Sometimes we talked about loss, her mother, my grandmother, and shared ways to keep their memories alive. At other times, we debated whether Daniel would ever remember to replace the furnace filter or which family recipe needed tweaking. These moments weren't always perfect. Conflict still flared up occasionally, as it does in any family. But now, we trusted each other to mend what was strained, rather than let old grievances fester. Looking back, I wonder if the most important bridge we built was not just between mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, but between two women determined to honor the people they loved. By letting each other in, despite our differences, we made room for healing, for ourselves and everyone else in the house. There were days when my old fears returned. A sharp word, an unnoticed gesture, or a family conversation I struggled to keep up with would send me spiraling into self-doubt. But each time, Linda, or someone else in the family, would reach out without fanfare and quietly pull me back in. Slowly, I learned to forgive those slips, both theirs and my own. I cultivated patience, resilience, and a confidence along the way that was no longer contingent upon someone else's opinion of me. If the process had been easy, I might have taken it for granted. Instead, I treasure all of it, even the setbacks. The years of uncertainty and longing taught me to notice when a real change begins to grow. A gentle invitation, a shared laugh, a recipe passed down. It taught me that sometimes the families we marry into become the families we help remake, season by season, meal by meal, tradition by tradition. Perhaps the truest sign of belonging is that you're allowed to be fully yourself. In this new era, I could voice disagreements, advocate for my side of a family debate, and be certain that my intentions would be understood. The ironed perfection of early dinners was replaced by a comfortable chaos where all of us, newcomers and natives, learned from each other. Vietnamese conversations mingled with New England accents, and sometimes I'd catch Linda quoting a proverb from my childhood as if it were her own. On the anniversary of the crisis that nearly upended our lives, the family surprised me with a gathering full of laughter, food, and no small amount of good-natured teasing. Linda raised a glass, her eyes shining with emotion, and toasted to our Emily, the heart of our new family traditions. Those words, simple and melodic, settled something deep within me. I was home, not just in zip code or address, but in the hearts of a family that had once felt impossibly foreign. If I could send a message back to my younger self, the anxious, eager girl staring at the arrival screen in Logan Airport, I would whisper, "Be patient, don't shrink, their love will come, and you'll help them grow, too." I'd remind her that courage isn't only about surviving the storms, but about daring to stay soft and hopeful, to keep reaching for connection, even when it seems out of grasp. Some days, the memory of being an outsider stings, but mostly, I feel grateful for the hardships that softened us, for the stubborn hope that pushed me past my comfort zone, and above all, for the family who finally saw me for exactly who I am. Now, years after that first fragile exchange of trust, our lives are a tapestry of blended customs and shared milestones. Linda and I host holidays together, sometimes in English, sometimes in Vietnamese, always in a spirit of mutual celebration. Daniel teases that I've changed his mother for the better, but I know she's changed me too. Our bond is no longer defined by duty, but by choice. Looking back, I realize it was never a single grand event that won my acceptance. It was 1,000 small acts of courage, reaching out, forgiving, learning, staying, and the willingness to be seen, even when vulnerability felt like folly. With every holiday meal, every celebratory toast, every private note of gratitude, I see how far we've come. I'm not just part of the Campbell family. I am, in countless quiet ways, its heart. And for that, I am endlessly, fiercely thankful. Looking back with gratitude, when I pause now, years after those first shaky mornings in Boston, I'm flooded with memories that are painted in every hue of emotion. Doubt, homesickness, shame, pride, relief, sorrow, and above all, gratitude. This journey of becoming part of another family and another culture was nothing like what I imagined as a teenager, daydreaming beneath the tamarind trees in Vietnam. Back then, belonging seemed like a door you walked through just once, a clear, one-way threshold. In reality, it's a threshold I crossed again and again, sometimes crawling, sometimes striding confidently, and often looking back in wonder at how far I'd come. There's something humbling about reflecting on every stage of this process. The awkward small talk at dinners where no topic felt safe, the quiet heartbreaks of feeling invisible, the stinging moments of being misunderstood. But I see now that these experiences, painful as they sometimes were, gave substance and meaning to the transformation I underwent. If my early years had been easier, perhaps I would have never learned true patience or empathy for others walking their own difficult roads. Gratitude isn't just for the highlights, the promotion celebrations, the Thanksgiving feasts, the day Linda finally reached for my hand with honest affection. It also lives in all of the ordinary, overlooked days. The early winter mornings, brewing coffee in the kitchen, while the rest of the family slept. The hours spent perfecting a new recipe. The commutes on crowded subways that gave me time to daydream and steel my resolve. These countless hidden moments were the mortar that helped build the foundation I stand on now. I can honestly say that the gratitude I carry today is made up as much by the hardships as by the victories. Every tear-soaked night I spent doubting my place in the world made the warmth of acceptance shine brighter when it finally arrived. I'm grateful for the times my accent made me self-conscious because it reminded me of my roots and forced me to stand taller, shaping how I connect with others who feel like outsiders too. I'm grateful for all the failed attempts at small talk with Linda, my mother-in-law, because those awkward efforts laid the groundwork for the deep, authentic relationship we now share. A relationship whose value I appreciate even more because of its rocky start. Looking back, I see the story of resilience writing itself on every page of my new life. Even now, when things are settled and the hardest hurdles have faded into the past, tiny ripples of self-doubt still come and go. But they are gentler now. I've learned to talk myself through them, to remind myself that belonging was never about perfect assimilation, never about replacing old customs or hiding where I came from. Instead, it's about creating something new, together, with love and intention. That realization fills me with a quiet pride. I am part of this family, not because I forced myself to become someone else, but because I grew into a person capable of holding both histories at once. One of the greatest gifts of this entire odyssey has been the wisdom of perspective. I've come to see even the family tensions, the miscommunications, and the periods of stubborn silence as blessings in disguise. They taught me the value of forgiveness, not just forgiving others for not understanding me, but more importantly, forgiving myself for my own moments of fear or defensiveness. It's gratitude that allows me to savor the present, to laugh at the episodes that once made me cry. Whenever I hear the bubbling of a stew or smell ginger on the stove, I remember my first clumsy attempts to bring a taste of Vietnam to the Campbell kitchen. Where I used to feel judged, I now feel entrusted. That change, a subtle shift over years, reminds me how patience, persistence, and a willingness to stay open can transform even the most deeply set expectations. Perhaps the most profound gratitude I feel is for the sense of wholeness I have found. It did not come quickly or easily. It took thousands of difficult conversations, the courage to keep reaching out, and the humility to learn from others. But in the process, I discovered that my own heart could grow to hold joy and grief in equal measure. I've also found strength in my vulnerability, something my younger self would never have guessed. I used to see needing help or crying at night as weakness. Today, I recognize the tenderness, honesty, and the willingness to let others see my authentic self are the foundations of true connection. This gratitude spills over into my work, my friendships, and even the way I approach strangers now. Where I once shrank away from unfamiliar situations, worried that I'd never quite fit in, I move forward with curiosity first. I want to give to others the same patience, encouragement, and thoughtful guidance that eventually helped me blossom in America. I'm especially grateful for the gradual but profound shifts in my relationship with Linda, the mutual respect and genuine affection that now exist between us hardly seemed possible in those early, tension-filled days. I see how the changes in our dynamic have rippled through the entire family, making everyone a bit braver and more open-hearted. Even Daniel, my husband, has told me that he admires the tenacity and optimism I brought into the Campbell home, that the changes I sparked made all of them stronger too. It amazes me sometimes to look at the photo wall in our living room, where snapshots of my parents in Hanoi sit side by side with Michael's graduation portraits and family gatherings from all seasons. The once clear line between home and abroad, between us and them, has blurred into something far richer than I ever dreamed possible. I am grateful for this blending of traditions: mooncakes on the Thanksgiving table, cranberry sauce beside bowls of pho, and holiday toasts that sometimes mix English, Vietnamese, and a few words that only our family understands. Looking back, another unexpected benefit of struggling for acceptance is how deeply I now appreciate every gesture of trust. Whenever someone in the family seeks my advice or simply asks about Vietnamese festivals, I feel a surge of belonging that words can hardly capture. I try to pass on these small acts of understanding to friends, colleagues, and new arrivals to America who cross my path. People who, like me, are searching for a way to reconcile old selves with new dreams. It's also impossible to reflect on this journey without feeling immense gratitude toward my husband. Through every storm and celebration, Daniel's unwavering faith in me anchored my resolve. He listened without judgment, urged me to stand tall, even when I doubted myself, and made space for my culture and voice at every table. His love gave me the courage to keep building, pushing, and ultimately to forgive the world and myself for not offering instant acceptance. If I could send a message across time to the young woman stepping off the plane with a heart full of longing and fear, I know exactly what I would say. Be gentle with yourself. It's okay to break down sometimes. The ache and loneliness are part of the price you pay to grow. But hold on, because gratitude will bloom from hardship in ways you never expected. The lessons learned in struggle are deeper and richer than anything that comes easily. Each tear you shed is watering the soil for something resilient, a sense of self that no one can diminish, and a capacity to love that is far greater than the life you left behind. I would remind her that gratitude is not passive. It's an active choice, a practice that takes honesty, humility, and time. Most days it's quiet, a deep breath over morning coffee, a pause to savor laughter around the dinner table. But occasionally, it bursts forth, overwhelming and electric, coloring every memory with gold. I am grateful for my family back in Vietnam, who never pressured me to become someone different, and who always celebrated my smallest victories from half a world away. Their belief in me made every tough day a little easier to endure. Sometimes I walk around our neighborhood in Boston, thinking of how my journey is just one thread in a vast web of immigrant stories. Each is unique, but all are united by courage, hope, and that same longing for home and connection. The gratitude I carry stretches not just across oceans, but generations. I've realized that the act of looking back is itself an expression of gratitude. I don't erase the painful parts. Rather, I give them a place in my memory alongside the triumphs. I treasure the years where I thought every misstep was a disaster, because now I know they were simply steps forward toward more compassion, greater confidence, and a richer understanding of what it means to truly belong. My journey, with all its setbacks and detours, makes the present sweeter and more meaningful. Now, when I host gatherings, big, noisy, intergenerational meals with clashing languages and overlapping stories, I marvel at what has taken root. Acceptance didn't come in a single, clarifying moment, but through little acts of trust, forgiveness, and grit that accumulated into something unbreakable. There is redemption, I think, in seeing how hardship is not just survived, but woven into the most beautiful chapters of our life stories. If there's one gift I hope to pass on, to my own children, to anyone who feels out of place or unseen, it's the reassurance that the struggle to belong can yield a gratitude that lasts a lifetime. Forgiveness for yourself and others, the willingness to learn from adversity, and the persistence to try again and again. These are treasures that no separation or circumstance can ever take away. As I write this, the house is alive with sounds, snippets of Vietnamese and English, the clatter of dishes, the laughter that used to seem foreign, but now feels like home. Every corner, every photograph, and every tradition is touched by the journey I've taken to get here. My gratitude is not just for what I have, but for who I've become, a woman shaped by challenge, fueled by hope, and guided by the conviction that we can build belonging wherever we go. Looking back, I understand that belonging is a process, not a destination. Some days, old insecurities still flicker to life, but most days, gratitude wins out. I take nothing for granted. Not the friendships I've forged, the respect I've earned, nor the simple joy of knowing this kitchen, this family, is as much mine as anyone's. My story is proof that even the most daunting journeys can be lit by gratitude for every step along the way. So here's to the years of uncertainty, the long nights, and the victories, big and small. Here's to the patient love of family, the friendships grown from vulnerability, and the communities built across cultures. And most of all, here's to the gratitude that transforms adversity into the foundation for a life full of meaning, belonging, and hope.